Hey everybody, I am actually reading the full, or about to read the full Whistleblower Report out loud right here on YouTube Live. So you don't have to read it if you don't want to, although I suggest you do read it. You can play it in the background while you're doing other things, replay it and listen later if you wish to do so. But it occurs to me that people are so busy they don't really have time to sit and read. And therefore, hey, Barry Lee, I am taking the time to read this report out loud. Now, just a few house cleaning notes. There are notes at the bottom of the pages. I'm not going to read those because I don't want to interrupt the flow of what I'm going to read. However, I'm going to announce each page as I turn the page so that you can go back and I'll refer to a note. I'll say there's a note. You can go back and read what that note is later if you wish to do so. But what I want you to come away with is a complete understanding of the contents, because right now people in the media are throwing different bits and pieces of it at you as opposed to the whole thing. It's very important that in some way, either by someone like myself reading it to you or you're reading it yourself, or both, preferably both, you get the whole enchilada, as they say. So, oh, and one other thing, wherever there are numbers, names, acronyms, I will read to you what that actually stands for. For example, OMB means Office of Management and Budget, and I will tell you that so you don't have to ask, well, what is that? And with that, here goes. And I will show you what I'm reading, and then put this back so you can see it, okay? And then I won't have you shift your eyes anymore. Here it is, August 12th, 2019, the Honorable Richard Burr, Chairman, Select Committee on Intelligence, the Honorable Adam Schiff, Chairman, Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, United States House of Representatives, and then, of course, the United States Senate for the Honorable Richard Burr. It goes, Dear Chairman Burr and Chairman Schiff, and I will begin. Now, I am reporting in, quote, urgent concern, unquote, in accordance with the procedures outlined in 50 United States Code 3033K5A. This letter is, in capital letters, unclassified when separated from the attachment. In the course of my official duties, I have received information from multiple United States government officials that the President of the United States is using the power of his office to solicit interference from a foreign country in the 2020 U.S. election. This interference includes, among other things, pressuring a foreign country to investigate one of the president's main domestic political rivals. The president's personal lawyer, Mr. Rudolph Giuliani, is a central figure in this effort. Attorney General Barr appears to be involved as well. Over the past 4 months, more than a half dozen U.S. officials have informed me of various facts related to this effort. This information provided herein was relayed to me in the course of official interagency business. It is routine for U.S. officials with responsibility for a particular regional or functional portfolio to share such information with one another in order to perform policy making and analysis. I was not a directed witness to most of the events described. However, I found my colleagues' accounts of these events to be credible because, in almost all cases, multiple officials recounted fact patterns that were consistent with one another. In addition, a variety of information consistent with these private accounts has been reported publicly. I am deeply concerned that the actions described below constitute, quote, a serious or flagrant problem abuse, or violation of law or executive order that, quote, does not include differences of opinions concerning public policy matters, consistent with the definition of an, quote, urgent concern in 50 United States Code 3033K5G. I am therefore fulfilling my duty to report this information through proper legal channels to the relevant authorities. I am also concerned that these actions pose risks to United States national security and undermine the United States government's efforts to deter and counter foreign interference in U.S. elections. Next page. This is page 2. Unclassified. To the best of my knowledge, the entirety of this statement is unclassified when separated from the classified enclosure. I have endeavored to apply the classification standards outlined in Executive Order EO 13526 and to separate out information that I know or have reason to believe is classified for national security purposes. Note, if a classification marking is applied retroactively, I believe it is incumbent upon the classifying authority to explain why such a marking was applied and to which specific information it pertains. 1. The 25 July presidential phone call. Early in the morning of 25 July, the president spoke by telephone with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. I do not know which side initiated the call. This was the first publicly acknowledged call between the two leaders since a brief congratulatory call after Mr. Zelensky won the presidency on 21 April. Multiple White House officials with direct knowledge of the call informed me that after an initial exchange of pleasantries, the president used the remainder of the call to advance his personal interests. Namely, he sought to pressure the Ukrainian leader to take actions to help the president's 2020 re-election bid. According to the White House officials who had direct knowledge of the call, the president pressured Mr. Zelensky to, enter Allah, 1. Bullet point 1, initiate or continue an investigation, note 2, into the activities of former Vice President Joseph Biden and his son, Hunter Biden. Bullet point 2, assist in purportedly uncovering that allegations of Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election originated in Ukraine with a specific request that the Ukrainian leader locate and turn over servers used by the Democratic National Committee, DNC, and examined by the U.S. cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike, note 3, which initially reported that Russian hackers had penetrated the DNC's network in 2016. And, bullet point 3, meet or speak with two people the president named explicitly as his personal envoys on these matters, Mr. Giuliani and Attorney General Barr, to whom the president referred multiple times in tandem. 3, and I might note there is a large set of notes that appear at the bottom of page 2. Now I'm on page 3 of 9. Unclassified. The president also praised Ukraine's Prosecutor General, Mr. Yury Lutsenko, and suggested that Mr. Zelensky might want to keep him in his position. Note, starting in March 2019, Mr. Lutsenko made a series of public allegations, many of which he later walked back, about the Biden family's activities in Ukraine, Ukrainian officials' purported involvement in the 2016 U.S. election, and the activities of U.S. Embassy in Kiev. See Part 4 for additional context. The White House officials who told me this information were deeply disturbed by what had transpired in the phone call. They told me that there was already a, quote, discussion ongoing with White House lawyers about how to treat the call because of the likelihood, in the officials' retelling, that they had witnessed the president abuse his office for personal gain. The Ukrainian side was the first to publicly acknowledge the phone call. On the evening of 25 July, a readout was posted on the website of the Ukrainian president that contained the following line, and in parentheses it reads, translation from original Russian language readout. Bullet point. Quote, Donald Trump expressed his conviction that the new Ukrainian government will be able to quickly improve Ukraine's image, and this is underlined, and complete the investigation of corruption cases that have held back cooperation between Ukraine and the United States, unquote. Aside from the above-mentioned cases purportedly dealing with the Biden family and the 2016 U.S. election, I was told by White House officials that no other cases were discussed. Based on my understanding, there are approximately a dozen White House officials who listened to the call, a mixture of policy officials and duty officers in the White House Situation Room, as is customary. The officials I spoke with told me that participation in the call had not been restricted in advance because everyone expected it would be a, quote, routine call with a foreign leader. I do not know whether anyone was physically present with the president during the call. In addition to White House personnel, I was told that a State Department official, Mr. T. Ulrich Breckball, also listened in on the call. Second bullet point. I was not the only non-White House official to receive a readout of the call. Based on my understanding, multiple State Department and intelligence community officials were also briefed on the contents of the call as outlined above. 2. Efforts to restrict access to records related to the call. In the days following the phone call, I learned from multiple U.S. officials that senior White House officials had intervened to, quote, lock down, unquote, all records of the phone call, especially the official word-for-word transcript of the call that was produced, as is customary, by the White House Situation Room. This set of actions underscored to me that White House officials understood the gravity of what had transpired in the call. White House officials told me that they were, quote, directed, unquote, by White House lawyers to remove the electronic transcript from the computer system in which such transcripts are typically stored for coordination, finalization, and distribution to cabinet level officials. That was page 3. Now I'm going to page 4, unclassified. Instead, the transcript, this is bullet point 2 of 2 in this section. Instead, the transcript was loaded into a separate electronic system that is otherwise used to store and handle classified information of an especially sensitive nature. One White House official described this act as an abuse of this electronic system because the call did not contain anything remotely sensitive from a national security perspective. I do not know whether similar measures were taken to restrict access to other records of the call, such as contemporaneous handwritten notes taken by those who listened in. 3. Ongoing concerns. On 26 July, a day after the call, U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations Kurt Volker visited Kiev and met with President Zelensky and a variety of Ukrainian political figures. Ambassador Volker was accompanied in his meetings by U.S. Ambassador to the European Union Gordon Sondland. Based on multiple readouts of these meetings recounted to me by various U.S. officials, Ambassadors Volker and Sondland reportedly provided advice to the Ukraine leadership about how to, quote, navigate, unquote, the demands that the president had made of Mr. Zelensky. I also learned from multiple U.S. officials that on or about 2 August, Mr. Giuliani reportedly traveled to Madrid to meet with one of President Zelensky's advisors, Andriy Yermak. The U.S. officials characterized this meeting, which was not reported publicly at the time, as a, quote, direct follow-up, unquote, to the president's call with Mr. Zelensky about the, quote, cases that they had discussed. First bullet point in this. Separately, multiple U.S. officials told me that Mr. Giuliani had reportedly privately reached out to a variety of other Zelensky advisors, including Chief of Staff Andriy Baldin and Acting Chairman of the Security Service of Ukraine, Ivan Bogdanov. Second bullet point in this. I do not know whether those officials met or spoke with Mr. Giuliani, but I was told separately by multiple U.S. officials that Mr. Yermak and Mr. Bogdanov intended to travel to Washington in mid-August. On 9 August, the president told reporters, and I quote, I think, in parentheses, President Zelensky is going to make a deal with President Putin, and he will be invited to the White House. And we look forward to seeing him. He's already been invited to the White House, and he wants to come. And I think he will. He's a very reasonable guy. He wants to see peace in Ukraine, and I think he will be coming very soon, actually, unquote. 4, circumstances leading to up to the 25 July presidential phone call. Beginning in late March 2019, a series of articles appeared in an online publication called The Hill. In these articles, several Ukrainian officials, most notably Prosecutor General Yury Lutsenko, made a series of allegations against other Ukrainian officials and current and former U.S. officials. Mr. Lutsenko and his colleagues alleged, inter alia, and there's by the way, a note on that page. I'm going from page 4 now to page 5. Bullet point 1, that they possessed evidence that Ukraine officials, namely head of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, Artem Sintink, and Member of Parliament Sergei Chenchenko, had interfered in the 2016, had, quote, interfered, unquote, interfered in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, allegedly in collaboration with the DNC and the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. Bullet point 2, that the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, specifically U.S. Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, who had criticized Mr. Lutsenko's organization for its poor record on fighting corruption, had allegedly obstructed Ukrainian law enforcement agencies' pursuit of corruption cases by providing a do not prosecute list, and had blocked Ukrainian prosecutors from traveling to the United States expressly to prevent them from delivering their evidence about the 2016 election. Note 6, by the way. And now we go into bullet point 3 in this area, that on page 5 of 9, that former Vice President Biden had pressured Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko in 2016 to fire then Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin in order to quash a purported criminal probe into Burisma Holdings, a Ukrainian energy company on whose board the former Vice President's son Hunter sat. Note 7, this page. In several public comments, note 8, Mr. Lutsenko also stated that he wished to communicate directly with Attorney General Barr on these matters. The allegations by Mr. Lutsenko came on the eve of the first round of Ukraine's presidential election on 31 March. By that time, Mr. Lutsenko's political patron, President Poroshenko, was trailing Mr. Zelensky in the polls and appeared likely to be defeated. Mr. Zelensky had made known his desire to replace Mr. Lutsenko as Prosecutor General. On 21 April, Mr. Poroshenko lost the runoff to Mr. Zelensky by a landslide. See enclosure for additional information, going from 5 to page 6 of 9. First bullet point, page marked Unclassified. It was also publicly reported that Mr. Giuliani had met on at least 2 occasions with Mr. Lutsenko, once in New York in late January and again in Warsaw in mid-February. In addition, it was publicly reported that Mr. Giuliani had spoken in late 2018 to former Prosecutor General Shulkin in a Skype call arranged by two associates of Mr. Giuliani. Note 10. Second bullet point. On 25 April, in an interview with Fox News, the president called Mr. Lutsenko's claims big, quote unquote, and quote unquote again, incredible, and stated that the Attorney General would, quote, want to see this. On or about 29 April, I learned from U.S. officials with direct knowledge of the situation that Ambassador Yoyanovich had been suddenly recalled to Washington by senior State Department officials for, quote, consultations, unquote, and would most likely be removed from her position. First bullet point here. Around the same time, I also learned from a U.S. official that, quote, associates, unquote, of Mr. Giuliani were trying to make contact with the incoming Zelensky team. Second bullet point, on 6 May, the State Department announced that Ambassador Yanovich would be ending her assignment in Kiev as planned. However, several U.S. officials told me that, in fact, her tour was curtailed because of pressure stemming from Mr. Lutsenko's allegations. Mr. Giuliani subsequently stated in an interview with a Ukrainian journalist published on 14 May that Ambassador Yoyanovich was, quote, removed, because she was part of the efforts against the president, unquote. On 9 May, the New York Times reported that Mr. Giuliani planned to travel to Ukraine to press the Ukrainian government to pursue investigations that would help the president in his re-election bid, his 2020 re-election bid, There are 3 bullet point paragraphs. First bullet point paragraph reads as follows. In his multitude of public statements leading up to and in the wake of the publication of this article in the New York Times, Mr. Giuliani confirmed that he was focused on encouraging Ukrainian authorities to pursue investigations into alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 U.S. election and alleged wrongdoing by the Biden family. Note 12. Second bullet point paragraph. On the afternoon of 10 May, the president stated in an interview with Politico that he planned to speak with Mr. Giuliani about the trip. Third bullet point paragraph. A few hours later, Mr. Giuliani publicly canceled his trip, claiming that Mr. Zelensky was, quote, surrounded by enemies of the U.S. president and of the United States, unquote. On 11 May, Mr. Lutsenko met for 2 hours with President-elect Zelensky, according to a public account given several days later by Mr. Lutsenko. Mr. Lutsenko publicly stated that he had told Mr. Zelensky that he wished to remain as Prosecutor General. Now we go into page 7 of 9. Unclassified. Starting in mid-May, I heard from multiple U.S. officials that they were deeply concerned by what they viewed as Mr. Giuliani's circumvention of national security decision-making processes to engage with Ukrainian officials and relay messages back and forth between Kiev and the president. These officials also told me, first bullet point paragraph, that the State Department officials, including Ambassadors Volker and Sondland, had spoken with Mr. Giuliani in an attempt to, quote, contain the damage, unquote, to U.S. security, and, second bullet point paragraph, that Ambassadors Volker and Sondland during this time period met with members of the new Ukrainian administration and, in addition to discussing policy matters, sought to help Ukrainian leaders understand and respond to the differing messages they were receiving from official U.S. channels on the one hand, and Mr. Giuliani on the other. New paragraph. During the same time frame, multiple U.S. officials told me that the Ukrainian leadership was led to believe that a meeting or a phone call between the president and President Zelensky would depend on whether Zelensky showed willingness to, quote, play ball, unquote, on the issues that had been publicly aired by Mr. Lutsenko and Mr. Giuliani. Parent. Note, this was the general understanding of the state of affairs as conveyed to me by U.S. officials from late May into early July. I do not know who delivered this message to the Ukrainian leadership or when. See enclosure for additional information. Shortly after President Zelensky's inauguration, it was publicly reported that Mr. Giuliani met with 2 other Ukrainian officials, Ukraine's special anti-corruption prosecutor, Mr. Nazar Zelensky, and a former Ukrainian diplomat named Andriy Tezhensko. Both Mr. Andolinsky and Mr. Tezhensko are allies of Mr. Lutsenko and made similar allegations in the above-mentioned articles in The Hill. On 13 June, the president told ABC's George Stephanopoulos that he would accept damaging information on his political rivals from a foreign government. On 21 June, Mr. Giuliani tweeted, "New Prez of Ukraine, still silent on investigation of Ukraine interference in 2016 and alleged Biden bribery of Poroshenko. Time for leadership and investigate both if you want to purge how Ukraine was abused by Hillary and Clinton people," unquote. That's the tweet. In mid-July, I learned of a sudden change in policy with respect to U.S. assistance for Ukraine. See enclosure for additional information. Now we go into page 8 of 9. This is a rather short page because much of the information here is redacted. Classified Appendix. I'm going to show you this. Classified Appendix. Supplemental classified information is provided below. Additional information related to Section 2. TS, redacted. According to multiple White House officials I spoke with, the transcript of the president's call with President Zelensky was placed into a computer system managed directly by the National Security Council, NSC, Directorate for Intelligence Programs. This is a standalone computer system reserved for cold word level intelligence information, such as covert action, According to information I received from White House officials, some officials voiced concerns internally that this would be an abuse of the system and was not consistent with the responsibilities of the Directorate for Intelligence Programs. According to White House officials I spoke with, this was not the first time under this administration that a presidential transcript was placed into this code word level system solely for the purpose of protecting politically sensitive rather than national security sensitive information. You redacted. S redacted. I would like to expand upon two issues mentioned in Section 4 that might have a connection with the overall effort to pressure the Ukrainian leadership, as I do not know definitely whether the below-mentioned decisions are connected to the broader efforts I have described. I have chosen to include them in the classified annex, if they indeed represent genuine policy deliberations and decisions formulated to advance U.S. foreign policy and national security. One might be able to make a reasonable case that the facts are classified. Redacted note. I learned from U.S. officials that on or around 14 May, the president instructed Vice President Pence to cancel his planned travel to Ukraine to attend President, and then it's redacted, Zelensky's inauguration on 20 May. Now we're on the page 9 of 9. And I'll read the rest to you in the normal way. And I'll repeat. Zelensky's inauguration on 20 May. Secretary of Energy Rick Perry led the delegation instead. According to these officials, it was also, quote, made clear, unquote, to them that the president did not want to meet with Mr. Zelensky until he saw how Zelensky, quote, chose to act, unquote, in office. I do not know how this guidance was communicated or by whom. I also do not know whether this action was connected with a broader understanding described in the unclassified letter that a meeting or a phone call between the president and President Zelensky would depend on whether Zelensky showed willingness to, quote, play ball, unquote, on the issues that have been publicly aired by Mr. Lutsenko and Mr. Giuliani. Redacted mark note, on 18 July, an Office of Management and Budget, OMB, official informed departments and agencies that the president, earlier that month, had issued instructions to suspend all U.S. security assistance to Ukraine. Neither Office of Management and Budget, OMB, nor the National Security Council, NSC, staff knew why this instruction had been issued. During interagency meetings on 23 July and 26 July, Office of Management and Budget, OMB officials again stated explicitly that the instruction to suspend this assistance had come directly from the president, but they were still unaware of a policy rationale. As of early August, I heard from U.S. officials that some Ukrainian officials were aware that U.S. aid might be in jeopardy, but I do not know how or when they learned of it. That's it. It ends right here. See? There. So I'm going to post this right now as a link in the description area so that there's actually already a script version that I posted of this. I want to make sure that link is in there so you can read it yourself. I really encourage you to draw your own conclusions. It's difficult for me to come away without saying what I'm about to say, but this is absolutely ridiculous. And it is an obvious dereliction of duty and abuse of power by the President of the United States that is at such a high level of awfulness that even his own aides, note, White House officials are completely listed in this all the time, all right, that even they felt necessary to report that, okay? So check it out for yourself, and thanks for listening. And subscribe to Zenny62 for more. Thank you.